I am here, and I've come several thousand miles to be here to talk to you this evening about what I consider to be the most important issue of our time. And I say this bluntly and straightforward. It's probably the most important issue in the history of the human race. And this is my conclusion after well over 30 years of research. And before I'm finished this evening, I hope maybe that some of you will agree with me. But that's why I'm here. I've retired from careers twice. I spent 27 years on active duty in the United States Army. After I retired from the U.S. Army, I spent another 14 years working with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So I have a total of over 41 years of government service. And I've been inside, and I've seen how the lies are conducted and the cover-ups. And I have to tell you honestly and bluntly, your government is lying to you as much as my government is lying to the American taxpayer. And I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but I have a nagging suspicion that it's not a great surprise to many of you. MOD and DOD have literally been in bed with each other for at least since 1948-49 on this subject. And I think it's important to also tell you why I'm violating my national security oath. Every time I speak out on this subject, I indeed violate my national security oath. And as such, I place myself in a place of risk where I can go to prison for 10 years, I can be fined $10,000, and I can forfeit all of my pay and allowances, retirement pay and allowances forever. So I want you to understand that what I'm doing, I'm not doing lightly. I'm doing it after a great deal of thought. I'm doing it intentionally. And for you old soldiers in the audience who might be a little ticked at me for violating my security oath, I want you to know something. I will go to my grave carrying secrets that I will never divulge to anyone. But this subject, this matter, is so important to the human race that I'm violating my oath intentionally, and I'm encouraging my friends to do the same. We are, I believe, making some progress. I understand that Gordon Cooper, one of our astronauts, just recently gave a full-hour interview to the Discovery Channel, which should be airing on your TV sometime this spring. There's a number of other astronauts who will be doing the same very soon. Now tonight, I'm going to tell you what I have seen. I'm going to share with you what I have learned, and I'm also going to tell you what I have concluded. I think it's very important that you understand something here. I don't want any of you to leave the room tonight believing anything I may have said simply because I've said it. What you're hearing this evening are my views after all those years of service. I want you to understand that I'm not trying to preach, and I'm not trying to be a prophet, and I don't try to proselytize and convince you of anything. But when I tell you that in my view this is the most important issue in the history of the human race, I encourage you to go out, do your own research, inform yourselves, and reach your own conclusions, because the evidence is there. All you have to do is dig for it. Sometimes you have to fight your government to get it, but it's there. Now, before I go any further, there's another issue I want to say. There's a young man in this audience tonight that I would like to introduce you to, and I suspect many of you know him. I just met him a few days ago, and I am very delighted to call him a fellow warrior and a friend. David Icke, would you please stand up? David, where are you? David Icke. Ladies and gentlemen, this young man is a true warrior, and let me tell you, he's rocked some boats and rattled some cages in the last few short years. And keep it up, David. We're going to get him on a circuit in the U.S. here, hopefully very soon. I would like to lay a couple of quotes on you, if I may, because I think they're important to set the stage of your imagination for some of the things that I'm going to be divulging with you. I know you are all well aware of the great Shakespearean play Hamlet, where the young prince in the first act says to his good friend, There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, that are dreamt of in your philosophy. And I want to remind you of that. There's also a British astronomer and scientist a few years ago by the name of Haldane, who also said that the universe is not only stranger than we know, it is stranger than we can know. And I want you to keep that in your mind as this evening progresses. Now, we could have some slides up here, please. Thank you. Most of my adult life was spent in the military. I've said to people, and I repeat, I've been places I should not have been, and I've done things I should not have done. Most of my years in the military were in the infantry, in special forces, special operations. I've had special assignments. When my president was lying to the American people and saying that we were not in Laos and Cambodia, we were in Laos and Cambodia. And as I say, I look back on those years with a sense of pride. And I've done some things I should not have done, but I did them with the best of intentions, and I served my country as loyally as I knew how. But I'm standing here now, I'm taking a stand against my government, and I'm taking a stand against your government, and I'm saying that the time has come for the line to stop. Your government and mine and all the other major governments on this planet have got to come forward and tell their people the truth. This issue is earth-shaking in its implications. And when the truth finally does come out, and it will indeed come out, it's unraveling already. It's going to change the world, and it'll never, ever be the same. But I keep pushing and I keep shoving, and as long as I've got breath in my body, I'm going to continue to do the same thing, and I invite you to join us. I was a rather typical professional military type, I suspect. I was not particularly outstanding. I served as a reserve officer during the Korean War. I led combat troops in Korea in '51. I led combat patrols in Vietnam in 1970. But in 1963, this professional soldier with the crew cut, the no-nonsense type, the pragmatic kind of guy who had to kick it, bite it, touch it, see it, to believe that it existed, received an assignment to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe, at that time located just outside of Paris, France, at a little town known as Roquencourt. This is the shield, by the way. And when I arrived in 1963, I learned of a NATO shape study that had been initiated in 1961. When I arrived, everybody at the headquarters were talking about it. Everybody gossiped about it in the Nafi cafeterias. And ladies, yes, we in the military gossiped much more than you do. We talked about it incessantly. It was a matter of great interest and great concern to everybody. It was a 3-year study. It was initiated in 1961 because of a series of close encounters that almost started World War III. Now, this is a Cold War map that I brought with me, and I apologize for the imperfections. It's not that good, but it'll show you. It shows you a divided Europe, and what was happening in the late 50s and early 60s, that large numbers of circular metallic objects were flying over Europe, usually from the Soviet sector in the east. They would fly over the Warsaw Pact areas. They would fly over Germany, France, and in most cases they would fly over to the southern coast of England, and then they would turn north and they would disappear off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea. Now, these objects were large. They were flying very high, they were flying very fast, and it was very obvious that they were flying under intelligent control. And for a time, the Soviets thought they belonged to us, and for a short time, we even believed they might belong to the Soviets. It became quite clear after a year or two that the repeatedly demonstrated advanced technology of these objects were something we nor the Soviets had in 1961, 64, or 70, or 90, or 96. We still today do not have the technological capability to do what some of these objects can do. But the question arose, where are they from? Who are they? What are they here for? What's really going on? We had almost begun shooting at each other, the Soviets and us, the Allies, several times, for the wrong reasons. On the morning of February the 2nd, 1961, an event occurred about 2 in the morning that almost began World War III. When it was over, and it only took about 18 minutes, this massive flyover of these large metallic circular objects flying over Europe, the Soviets went on red alert, the NATO allies went on red alert, the Soviets closed the wall in Berlin, everybody was gearing up, and in those days we were looking at each other across the divided Europe with our fingers on the triggers and our thumbs poised above the red buttons. And thermonuclear war was moments away. A British Air Marshal by the name of Sir Thomas Pike in 1961, who was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe at that time in Paris, said, "We've had enough of this. We're going to initiate an in-house study and find out what the hell is going on. Who are they? Where are they from? Why are they here? And what's it all about?" It took 3 years. From 61 to 1964, they published this in 1964, in the late summer of 64. They called it an assessment. It was a document that was roughly 1.5 inches thick, and it was supported by basically 8 inches of annexes and appendices. Copy number 1, when it was published, went to the Secretary General of NATO, who funded the whole study. Copy number 2 went to my boss, General Lyman Lemnitzer, an American Army 4-star general, who at that time was the Supreme Allied Commander. Copy number 3 was placed in the Shape War Room, a place we called Shock, a place that I worked on 12-hour shifts from time to time. Copy 3 was placed in the vault inside of Shock. And after it was published, and after I had a sense to see it, the opportunity to read it, I reread it, I studied it, I analyzed it, I damn near memorized it, and I went into a state of shock, literally. Because when this document, with all of its implications and all of its ramifications, was finally published, it had an impact upon me where I had never ever quite been the same. And I have to tell you, it had an impact on a lot of the top generals and admirals in NATO at that time, very much like it had upon me. An American 4-star general by the name of Robert Lee, who was the air deputy at that time. His aide told me that the old man sat down after having gone through this, and he threw his hat across the ring, and he said, "My God, do you realize what this means? Nothing will ever be the same. All of what we have, our missiles, our satellites, our bombers, our fighters, our rockets, thermonuclear weapons, none of it. It meant nothing." The implications of this study, the impact it had upon the military leaders at NATO at that time, was overwhelming. General Lee says nothing will ever be the same. Well, I agreed. Nothing ever has been the same for me. The Shape study in 1964 was a beginning for me. I read it, studied it, analyzed it until I left Shape in 1967, when General de Gaulle threw the NATO allies out of France. There's a big story there, and I won't get into all of the history of it, but General de Gaulle withdrew from the military alliance in 1967, and in that time we had to pick up Shape headquarters, move the whole kit and caboodle up to a new facility outside of Brussels where it exists today. After I helped make that move, after I helped move all of the classified materials in 1967, I came home. But I want you to know that that study was just a beginning for me. This is a photograph of what those objects look like. This is an actual picture of one of those objects. They ranged anywhere from 10 to 30 meters in size. And they're still flying all over Europe, and they're still flying all over the United Kingdom. Now, their shapes have changed a little bit. You're going to be seeing a lot of big triangles here before too long. But this is a classic UFO, the flying saucer. This is an actual photograph taken along the Rhine River in Germany. Again, it's not that clear. The photographer was quite a state of shock when he saw this object. As you can see, the Rhine River is back here. There's a castle on the hill. You can see old German houses here. But this is what the objects look like. Now, the photographer clearly stated that when he snapped this picture, none of this below was apparent to the eye. All he saw was a circular disc with a dome on top. The camera picked this up, but he didn't see it. Now, we have surmised later that that's probably a manifestation of a propulsion system of some kind, a corona of some kind. The eye didn't see it, but the camera did. But that's what these things look like. That's what they still look like. And they vary in size, as I say, from 10 meters to 30 meters. Ladies and gentlemen, we have even got photographs of some of them that are over a mile in length. And I must tell you that one of your British astronomers found one in orbit between Mercury and Venus that is 25 miles in diameter. It wasn't there, and then it was, and they determined that it's metallic and it's a perfect sphere. And there it is, 25 miles in diameter. And Bracewell said, if you don't believe me, all you have to do is look. Here are the coordinates, and here's how you look. And of course, a lot of people looked, and no one has said a word since. Now, this is only part of the thing. This is the tip of the iceberg. Would you turn the slides off at the moment, please? I want to get into some more material here. And we'll get back to the slideshow after a short break. As I told you, my exposure to this study in 64 to 67 changed my life in ways that I would never have imagined. I must tell you honestly and bluntly that my first marriage went on the rocks because of this subject. I had been married to a woman for 34 years and we'd raised 2 kids, and my first wife could not deal with the subject at all. And after I had been exposed to the study in 1964, I almost was obsessed. I do not understand how you can get exposed to this kind of information and just back away and not pay any more attention. I can't, and anyone I've known can't do it either. I've talked to Busty, I've talked to Matthew, I've talked to Lee, all of them who are involved in this. Roy Lake is another one. Once you've got your toe in the water, you can't back off and never put your toe back. You have to throw yourself in, immerse yourself, because my God, what you really begin to learn changes you in so many ways. Well, let me go on. I wander here a bit. I ramble some, and I apologize to you. I have no fixed presentation. I've got so much to share with you, so many important things. Let me tell you what the SHAPE study concluded in 1964. And I'm reading to you from a classified top secret document here. Now, if there's anyone here from MOD, come up and chat with me after I'm finished and we'll have a beer. I have never spoken to an audience in the last 3 years where there hasn't been at least one person in the audience from the Defense Intelligence Agency or the Central Intelligence Agency or the National Security Agency. I spoke in Leeds last week, and a young man came up and introduced himself before I went on. And he says, delighted to see you. I had to come down and hear what you had to say. He says, I'm assigned at a U.S. facility here just up the road a bit. And I says, you wouldn't by any chance be working at Menwith Hill, would you? He said, well, yes. And most of you, I assume, know that Menwith Hill is one of the most classified super secret facilities in the United Kingdom. It is a U.S., UK, National Security Agency facility. And every phone call from Europe to the United States, every one, goes through the computers at Menwith Hill. But the young man was very candid, came forward and very pleasant, and said, hey, I just thought I'd say hello. So he was outspoken about it, but some of them will sit out there and not identify themselves. But if there is someone here from MOD, I want you to know you're welcome. I know that you're simply doing a job, and I commend you for it. But what was there about this shape study in 1967 that turned my life around and turned the lives of everyone who was involved with it? As I said, it was an inch and a half thick, and it was supported by roughly 8 inches of annexes and appendices. They titled it an assessment. It had a subtitle of an evaluation of a possible military threat to Allied forces in Europe. It was a military study. It had a direct military focus. It was not a broad, wide-ranging kind of study. It only took 36 months. But it was determined, is there a military threat? And when they concluded it in '64, they determined that apparently there was not a military threat. But let me read to you some of the annexes and appendices that supported this document. There was one on radar and electromagnetic effects. There was one on optical and light analysis. An annex on photographic and holographic analysis. There was one on historical research and evidence. There was one on metallurgical and technical analysis. One on atmospheric physics and meteorological studies. One on biological analysis and autopsies. And I will touch upon that briefly before the evening's over. An annex on sociological studies and implications. There was one on psychological studies and the mass effect and impact upon people. And the last one, and in my view, over years and years of research and study, probably one of the most important of all, there was an annex on the theological implications and the worldwide effect upon organized religions. And I believe today, even after all these years, that that's still probably one of the major reasons why the lid is still being kept down on this subject, why your government and mine and all of the other organized governments on this planet are scared to death to release this whole study with all of its implications. Because it's going to have an impact upon the world that's going to bring all of our organized traditional structures crumbling around our knees. Now, I honestly believe this. I believe that once the truth comes out, there will be a worldwide economic collapse. I believe that once the truth comes out, there will be a worldwide impact and shock, sociologically and psychologically. But ladies and gentlemen, the implications of this study and all of the years of research and all of the things we have learned since 1964 are even more powerful. The impact on organized churches and religions on this planet will be devastating. Now, I'm expressing a personal view here, but I'm also expressing the view of a lot of military people who's been professional people who've served their countries for years and years. There are people here in the United Kingdom who have the same opinion. There are people right here in the United Kingdom who are scared to death about what this will mean once it's released. I also must tell you that you're very fortunate here. You have some of the world's finest researchers and experts on this subject right here in the United Kingdom. And I always take an opportunity to tip my hat and say hello and compliment a young man by the name of Timothy Good, who has written a number of books on this subject. But to Americans, I am continually recommending that they read Timothy's first major, powerful book, which is about 3 inches thick. It's titled Above Top Secret. It's the single best one-volume approach and introduction to this subject that I have ever read. And I want to ask you to go out, if you haven't read it soon, because his next big book is coming out in April. But Tim is a researcher. He's an honorable, decent man. He also has some access to some sources here that are amazing to me. I won't get into that, but he does have a good friend by the name of retired Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Peter Hill Norton, who was kind enough to write the foreword to Timothy's book, Above Top Secret. And Lord Hill Norton has even been honest enough and candid enough to come out on American television and express his views on this subject. So if the Admiral ever hears about this presentation tonight, I want to say, Admiral, God bless you. Thank you for coming forward, being honest. Keep up the good work. But you've got some of the best in the world here in this country. You should be very grateful for that. Now, what was the study all about? What did it conclude after 3 years? Matthew, you're going to probably have to give me some pointers on time here as we get closer to the end of the half hour. Sort of remind me, if you will. Here is what the assessment concluded, and here are the things basically that changed my life, turned me completely around. And as I say, I've never quite been the same since. What you see in front of you here with the beard and the long hair is simply protest. After all those years of wearing a crew cut and scraping my face with a sharp piece of metal, and I blame this program on it here, this subject. As I said, I really became a bit of a hippie, I suppose, over the years. But let me tell you what the study concluded and what really had its impact upon me. The planet Earth, and apparently the entire human race, is and has been the subject of an extensive, intensive, and massive survey and examination by several extraterrestrial civilizations. This survey has been extremely thorough and detailed. These civilizations have demonstrated not only high intelligence, but an extremely advanced technology that may possibly be hundreds, if not thousands of years beyond our own. Evidence collected and studied by this report indicates that apparently there is some kind of a process or a plan unfolding. They, whoever they are, continually demonstrate that the development of some kind of program is underway. Now, they knew that in 1964, and we know it in 1996. I'm not sure how many of our government authorities and military people know what that plan is all about. But something is unfolding, something is happening, something is developing, and we knew it as early as '64. Evidence in this report leads to the conclusion that this survey or program has been going on for a very long time, possibly several thousands of years. The military intelligence analysis have concluded that there did not appear to be a major military threat involved. The conclusions seem to indicate that if they were either malevolent or hostile, that there was absolutely nothing that we could do at that time. And I have to tell you, there's nothing we could do at this time. NATO and SHAPE policy dictates that an ongoing study continue by the various military committees, and that as many resources as possible by the major powers be committed to this matter. The entire subject is considered to be of the highest importance and extremely sensitive. This committee recommends that the highest level of classification be placed upon this matter, and if approved by SACURE, to be cosmic top secret or above. When they published it in '64, they gave it a cosmic top secret clearance. 2 years ago, Cecilia and I were visiting. We were in Dusseldorf. We took a weekend in between, and we traveled over to Brussels. And I was able to visit the old SHAPE headquarters that I helped set up in 1967. While I was in there, I found out that the study is still in the files. It is still classified cosmic top secret. And it is still considered to be the most sensitive document NATO has. I hope that the time will come when NATO, SHAPE, your country, my country, all of them decide the time has come to tell the people the truth. Because I have said repeatedly to American taxpayers, it's not just a matter of you deserve the truth. You have a right to the truth. You have a need to know the truth, and for God's sake, you're paying all the bills. Who is this bunch of arrogant bureaucrats that have decided to keep something so incredibly powerful and earth-shaking from you? Yeah. Now that is the SHAPE study, and that's what launched me on what I call a 30-year synthesis. I told you I've never been the same, but I also was not satisfied with just what I had learned while I was at NATO. All the years left in my career, from 1967 till I retired in 1976, I was a devout, dedicated, eager beaver on this subject. I used to visit some of my friends and they would say, "Oh God, here he comes again." I'd stick my nose in their files and grill them and ask them questions, and I got to be a real nuisance. But I encouraged a lot of them to do some research of their own, and I think I threw a few pebbles into the water that made a lot of ripples. But that was the beginning for me in 1967, and what I have learned since is even more important, at least in my conclusions. Now let me tell you basically what I have learned over the years, what I have seen and learned and concluded. And why is it that I stand in front of you and tell you that I'm talking to you about the most important issue of our time, and very possibly the most important issue in the history of the human race? Well, here is what I have concluded, and I found that many, many researchers have reached exactly the same conclusions that I have. I brought with me a copy of an article written by a famous French astrophysicist, Jacques Vallée. We reproduced a few copies, and Cecilia has them out there on the table, and you can pick them up simply for the cost of reproduction. But Jacques is a brilliant man. He's an astrophysicist, and he's also a computer genius. He's been studying the UFO phenomenon for over 30 years. He was a fellow friend of Allen Hynek, the American astronomer who was the advisor to Project Blue Book many, many years ago. So I encourage you to pay attention to what Jacques has to say, and I'm pleased and proud to tell you that my conclusions and Jacques' are almost basically the same. When I began my research, I was very curious and very interested in who they were, just as the military study itself was all about. Who are they? Where are they from? Why are they here? And what's it all about? I'm still interested in that, but I have long since stopped doing individual bits and pieces of research. I no longer interview contactees or abductees. I no longer go out into the fields and pour plaster of Paris into landing gear imprints around in some farmer's pasture. I don't go out with my Geiger counter anymore and take radiation measurements. I used to do that all the time. I finally decided that this is a waste of my time. We're not trying to find out if there's such a thing as UFOs any longer. Your government and mine knew that 30 years ago. When the SHAPE study was published in 1967, I was to learn later that the United States Air Force and the Royal Air Force, I'm convinced, knew as much in 1949 as we learned from the SHAPE study in 1967. From 1947 to 49, UFOs were crashing all over the United Kingdom and all over the United States. Your forces were retrieving them, covering them up, shipping them out. The Army was doing the same thing. The Air Force in my country did the same thing. You all heard of Roswell, I'm sure. We had 12 crashes in 25 months, and Roswell was simply one. And in every one of those 12 crashes, we retrieved alien hardware, and we retrieved little bodies. And some of the little dudes were still alive when we retrieved them. Several we kept alive for quite a while. So stay tuned. You're going to hear a lot more about Roswell and about several of the other crash sites in the next few short months. But Roswell was one of 12. And there was a number going on here too. Now, as I said, when I left SHAPE in '64, the SHAPE headquarters at that time knew, the military and many of the leading politicians knew, that we were dealing with roughly 4 separate civilizations. And we knew that as early as 1967. When I retired in 1976, I was told by friends in some rather high places that they knew at least of a dozen different groups that were coming and going, that interrelating with us at some level. I imagine, and I've heard rumors, that, my God, it could be well over 100 at this point. Apparently, the evidence that we've collected indicates that space is literally teeming with intelligent life. It is not an exception. It basically appears to be the rule. The universe is teeming with life, and most of it is intelligent. Now, there are an extreme variety of shapes and sizes and forms and such, and we'll get into a little of that later. But in '64, we knew of 4. Now, the thing that troubled the generals and the admirals the most in 1964 was that one of those groups, and we had overwhelming evidence to support this, one of those groups looked exactly like we do. I mean exactly. They could sit next to you in a tram, restaurant, an airplane, a theater, right beside you, and you would never know. And it's usually at this point that I've noticed that some of the wives look at their husbands and sort of quizzically, and then, well, let me go on. They discussed it in '64. The conversations in the NAFI cafeteria. We used to discuss classified material all the time because all of us there had a cosmic level clearance. You couldn't work in shock unless you had a cosmic level. One day at lunch, we were sipping a little wine, and I have to tell you that in France, the French force you to drink wine. It's not an option, it's not a choice. You have to drink it. And so we're all sitting having lunch in the NAFI cafeteria, sipping a little wine, and the conversation got a little heated. And one of the generals said, "Do you realize that they could be walking up and down the corridors here of shape?" And a colonel said, "My God, do you realize they could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon?" And an American lieutenant colonel, who had had a bit too much wine for lunch, I think, said, "Do you realize they could even be in the White House?" Now, there was a little forced laughter at that point, particularly among the Americans around the table, because many of us had had some strong misgivings about the occupants of the White House over the last few years. And I'll be frank with you, I have some strong misgivings about the present occupant, but I won't go any further with that. This is an election year. I suspect you have some same misgivings about whoever occupies number 10 Downing Street from time to time. But this bothered the military at that time, that one of these groups looked so much like us that they could be in your midst and you would never know. Now, over the years, I have turned it around a bit, and I want you to think of this. It's not that they look like us, it's that we look like them. And there is a very important, powerful reason for that. But they drove the generals and the admirals up the wall in 1964. Now, almost every group I'm aware of today, after all these years of synthesis, are almost all of them humanoid, meaning that they stand upright, they have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, some kind of a hearing apparatus, usually some form of a nose, and a small mouth of some kind. They vary. They vary in color, they vary in size, they vary in shape, but they all appear to be basically humanoid. And the indications are that apparently that is a standard pattern in the universe. Now, I'm sure there are life forms out there that are not humanoid, but the ones that we are interrelating with here, that visit here, who come, walk around in our midst, fly over us, play games with our pilots, are basically humanoid. Anyhow, when the military reached these conclusions in 1964, as I said, they have continued to study it in desperation. Now, your military and mine, and one of the reasons that they're trying so hard to still sit on top of this cover-up, it isn't so much that they don't know how to tell you what they know. They honestly don't know how to tell you what they don't know. And you're not going to have military leadership, and you're not going to have political leadership in government admitting to you that there are things they don't know. If it had simply been a matter of coming forward 15, 20, 30 years ago and saying, "Hey, we think you have a need to know this. We've learned that there are some extraterrestrial intelligences out there, and they've been coming here and dropping in from time to time." If it were simply that, you would have probably been told a long time ago. When I retired in 1976, we knew that we were not merely dealing with interplanetary visitation. We had known at that time that we were dealing with intelligences that were apparently coming and going from other planets, even a couple in our own solar system. We learned at that early age, or at that early date, that we were dealing with intelligences that were apparently interstellar in their origin, coming here from other star systems. Now, don't ever believe the physicist or astronomer who tells you they can't get here from there, or we can't get there from here, that's a lot of nonsense. Yes, Cecilia, I avoided the ES word. We knew in '76, interplanetary, interstellar. We even had some evidence that some of the visiting intelligences were intergalactic. And for those of you who've studied astronomy and have some concept of what's out there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, the thing that troubled the scientists, the military, the politicians, and the physicists the most is we learned that we were apparently dealing with some advanced intelligences that apparently were multidimensional in their origin. Now, I'm not enough of a physicist to even begin to tell you what a dimension is. I know from what I've been told that we live in three. According to Einstein, the fourth is time and space. Quantum physicists, young theoretical physicists that are teaching in universities today, tell us that there are at least 10, maybe more, different dimensions. Well, I have a few personal views on that. If there's time, I'll share them with you. But stop for a moment and think. 4 groups in '64, 12 groups in '76, interplanetary, interstellar, intergalactic, and some apparently were multidimensional. And some of those advanced intelligences apparently have the ability to manipulate matter and time. Now stop for a moment and think what that means. They have that advanced capability that they can manipulate time and matter. Now that takes all of our old traditional Newtonian Einstein science and throws it right out the window. That's the kind of thing that when this reality finally does begin to come out, and your governments and mine decide finally to start sharing with us what they've learned, and the reality, and the implications, and the ramifications, I think you can understand why our world is changing, why it will change. There's going to be drastic, horrendous, massive earth changes. You talk about a paradigm shift, that's an understatement. The world that's going to be in the next few short years is going to be so unlike anything we've ever known before that I don't believe people will be able to deal with it. I don't believe people will be able to confront it unless they're prepared, unless they're educated, unless they're given something in the way of some kind of guidance and information. And who would you expect to turn to? Your government. And your government has been letting you down on it. And that's why I feel so strongly about what I'm doing in my small little way. If I can send 1 or 2 of you out of this room tonight with a heightened sense of curiosity and interest to go out there and read Tim's book and do your own homework and research, I will feel that I've accomplished something. Ladies and gentlemen, we're running out of time. We're not merely approaching the end of a decade, and we're simply not approaching the end of a century. And we're not merely approaching the end of a millennium. We are approaching the end of an age. We are approaching the end of an era. For the last 2,000 years, we've more or less been in the old Piscean age. The beautiful young man from Galilee 2,000 years ago brought it in. Well, we're almost finished with the age of Pisces. Just a few more years and we're going to be into the age of Aquarius, and it's going to be a new world, a new age, and a new beginning. Everything we've known and everything we've had is coming to an end. And I say this honestly and bluntly because I think you have a right to know. In my opinion, our old world is coming to an end. Now, I don't necessarily mean by that that the old planet's going to explode. I think it's going to be around for a few more billion years. But what's happening and what's coming is going to be so different than what you've known. There will be no comparisons whatsoever. Now, I've told you, I think, how are we doing on time, Matthew? Pretty good? 25 minutes yet to go?
You want an hour, yeah?
Yes.
5 minutes.
Oh, boy. God, I got to speed up a little bit here. Now, I've told you about my 30-year synthesis. I've told you that from the very beginning, I learned quite early on that there was no single discipline that I could dig into or study or apply myself to that was ever going to give me any answers to this. I mean, it was not just physics won't do it, astronomy won't do it, meteorology won't do it, history, mythology, archaeology. I found that all of them, I had to dig into damn near all of them before I began to get some kind of an idea of what was going on. I studied ancient history. I studied several of the hard sciences. I studied philosophy, theology. Only by applying my interest and efforts to a variety of different disciplines was I able to come up with something in the way of what I thought made sense. And it makes sense to me. I don't know whether it'll make any sense to you, but I've tried to come to terms and grasp what is really going on here. It's not just interplanetary visitation. We know that. That's been going on for thousands of years. It isn't just interstellar, intergalactic, multidimensional. We've even learned that. But what the hell is really going on here? About 10 years ago, it became very clear to me that I'm no longer interested in who are they, and why are they here, and where are they from. I found that my focus and my primary interest and my curiosity was directed to who are we, and why are we here. Where did we come from, and where are we going? And I've come up with what I believe to be some answers. They're my opinions. They're based on my 30 years of research. But I throw them out among you just to tease you a bit and say, do your own homework and do your own research. What have I concluded? Well, I think I can say it rather quickly. The human race is a hybrid race. We have literally been seeded on this planet. There is no such thing as a missing link. There is no missing link. The human race is a hybrid that has been seeded, and we have been genetically manipulated continually from the beginning of our history to what we are today. And that manipulation, that genetic manipulation, is still going on. Still going on today. I've concluded that we have had and continue to have an intimate interrelationship with several advanced extraterrestrial, highly evolved, incredibly involved intelligences out there. Some of them could be as much as 1 million to 1 billion years ahead of us. And stop for just a moment and imagine what that might be like. Just 1,000 years in technology. Imagine what the Earth will be like. Look what we've done in 150. My God, from the Wright brothers in 1903. And now you sit in a Boeing 747 and you're cruising at 40,000 feet, sipping a bourbon and eating a steak and watching the telly. And that's only in a few short years. Old Wilbur and Orville would have had a fit if they'd ever seen this. I'm always reminded of the joke, and it's real. It really happened. The good Bishop of Baltimore in Maryland in 1902 had said something to the effect that man will never fly. He wasn't meant to. That if had he been meant to fly, the good Lord would have given him the wings to do so. This is the good Bishop of Baltimore in Maryland. That bishop's name was Wright, and he had 2 nephews named Wilbur and Orville. And that's only just a few years ago. Imagine what the next few years will bring. Try, if you can, to imagine an intelligence, a society, a civilization that is 1 million years ahead of us. Our ancestors thought of them as gods, and we deified them because they've been coming and going with us from the beginning of our history. When I say intimate interrelationship, I mean intimate. Ladies and gentlemen, you have starseed in your veins. Many of you may have suspected it, but every one of you in the audience tonight is starseed. And that's one hell of a story. And that's one of the stories that your government doesn't want you to know. It's one of the stories that your church does not want you to know. It's one of the things that the beautiful young man in Galilee 2,000 years ago tried to say, and nobody grasped for a moment what he was talking about. He said, you are as gods. What I do, you can do, and even more. And he tried to tell him about his father's house having so many mansions. And he had other flocks, and he had other sheep. And that's only a Christian tradition. The same basic story is told in the Bhagavad Gita, the holy book of the Hindus. The same basic story is told in the book of the sayings of the compassionate Buddha. The same story is basically told in the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Every major religion on this planet tells exactly the same story. One of the things that breaks my heart so damn much is that with all this savagery and bloodletting that we're going on here on this planet, we have shed more of each other's blood because of religious differences than we ever have on political differences. And I've got to tell you honestly that that has got to stop. A door is being opened for us out there by members of our family to grow up and mature and come out there and take our rightful place in the universe. To step through that door, we're being invited to come out. We have reached a point, however, where we're not going to be able to go unless we decide to walk away from our old bigotries and animosities and bloodletting savagery. And you all know what I'm talking about. My God, look what's been going on in Bosnia. What happened a year or so ago in Rwanda. Look at the savagery and bloodletting in Northern Ireland. The hatreds, the animosities, and the bigotries. If I leave anything behind tonight from my being here, and I leave anything with you at all, I want to leave you with the concept that we are all the same. We are all immortal spirits. We are all part of the divinity. We are all part of the everlasting God. We live forever, and we've got to come to terms with that. The humanity and the brotherhood of the human race. Now, I said we're running out of time. A special moment has arrived. A crucial moment in our history. I call it one of these crucial moments. I call it, what is it then in nuclear physics? Critical mass. I believe that the human species has reached literally a critical mass. It can either survive and go out and take its place in the universe with all of the other intelligences. We can go out there and claim our destiny, which I believe that that's what it is. We have a place out there that we need to be a part of. Or we can self-destruct. And I think that we are at that brief, crucial moment, that critical mass, where we've got to decide among ourselves not to self-destruct, but to take this invitation and to step out there and go through that door and reach our infinite destiny in the universe and take our place with that family of intelligence that literally the universe seems to be teeming with. Now, in closing this first portion, I have to tell you, a lot of people have been fascinated for many years, particularly Christians who've read the Bible and are familiar with the book of Revelation. There's a word known as the apocalypse that many people have been talking about for a long, long time. I say this, concluding this first portion of my presentation, by telling you that I went to an old dictionary and I dug into this dictionary, which is about that thick. I think it's the Oxford Dictionary. I really wanted to know what the meaning of the word apocalypse was, because I've heard all of these threats and all of these stories in the book of Revelation. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, famine, whatever, plague, war, so on. And a lot of the Christian fundamentalists talk about the apocalypse as being part of the end of the world. Once the trumpets blow and the horsemen start riding and these things happen, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you what the word really means in Old Greek. Apocalypse. It means the disclosure, the uncovering, the revealing. And ladies and gentlemen, we're right smack in the middle of the apocalypse. It's been going on for 40, 50 years. The apocalypse is underway. There's only a few years left before it's going to be complete. We're in for some difficult times. You know it, you've seen it, you know it's coming. It's going to be awful for some people on this planet. It may be difficult for all of you here tonight. But in the years ahead, as it becomes difficult and it becomes even more frightening, and that you become terrorized by some of the things you're going to see and some of the things you're going to experience, I want you to keep this and remember this. A line from Leo Tolstoy, one of the great writers of our time, someone that I've always admired and loved. Count Leo Tolstoy repeatedly made clear that there is something in the human spirit that will survive and will prevail. There is a light that will not go out, no matter how dark the world becomes. And in the spirit of that light, I want to say thank you, God bless you, and let's take a short break. And who would you expect to turn to? Your government. And your government has been letting you down on it. And that's why I feel so strongly about what I'm doing in my small little way. If I can send one or two of you out of this room tonight with a heightened sense of curiosity and interest to go out there and read Tim's book and do your own homework and research, I will feel that I've accomplished something. Ladies and gentlemen, we're running out of time. We're not merely approaching the end of a decade, and we're simply not approaching the end of a century, and we're not merely approaching the end of a millennium. We are approaching the end of an age. We are approaching the end of an era. For the last 2,000 years, we've more or less been in the old Piscean age. The beautiful young man from Galilee 2,000 years ago brought it in. Well, we're almost finished with the age of Pisces. Just a few more years and we're going to be into the age of Aquarius. And it's going to be a new world, a new age, and a new beginning. Everything we've known and everything we've had is coming to an end. And I say this honestly and bluntly because I think you have a right to know. In my opinion, our old world is coming to an end. Now, I don't necessarily mean by that the old planet's going to explode. I think it's going to be around for a few more billion years. But what's happening and what's coming is going to be so different than what you've known. There will be no comparisons whatsoever. Now, I've told you, I think, how are we doing on time, Matthew? Pretty good? 25 minutes yet to go?
You want an hour,
yeah? Yes.
5 minutes.
Oh, boy. God, I've got to speed up a little bit here. Now, I've told you about my 30-year synthesis. I've told you that from the very beginning, I learned quite early on that there was no single discipline that I could dig into or study or apply myself to that was ever going to give me any answers to this. I mean, it was not just physics won't do it, astronomy won't do it, meteorology won't do it, history, mythology, archaeology. I found that all of them, I had to dig into damn near all of them before I began to get some kind of an idea of what was going on. I studied ancient history. I studied several of the hard sciences. I studied philosophy, theology. Only by applying my interest and efforts to a variety of different disciplines was I able to come up with something in the way of what I thought made sense. And it makes sense to me. I don't know whether it'll make any sense to you, but I've tried to come to terms and grasp what is really going on here. And you have to fight your government to get it, but it's there. Now, before I go any further, there's another issue I want to say. There's a young man in this audience tonight that I would like to introduce you to, and I suspect many of you know him. I just met him a few days ago, and I am very delighted to call him a fellow warrior and a friend. David Icke, would you please stand up? David, where are you? David Icke. Ladies and gentlemen, this young man is a true warrior. And let me tell you, he's rocked some boats and rattled some cages in the last few short years. And keep it up, David. We're going to get him on a circuit in the U.S. here, hopefully very soon. I would like to lay a couple of quotes on you, if I may, because I think they're important to set the stage of your imagination for some of the things that I'm going to be divulging with you. I know you are all well aware of the great Shakespearean play Hamlet, where the young prince in the first act says to his good friend, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, that are dreamt of in your philosophy." And I want to remind you of that. There's also a British astronomer and scientist a few years ago by the name of Haldane, who also said that the universe is not only stranger than we know, it is stranger than we can know. And I want you to keep that in your mind as this evening progresses. Now, we could have some slides up here, please. Thank you. Most of my adult life was spent in the military. I've said to people, and I repeat, I've been places I should not have been, and I've done things I should not have done. Most of my years in the military were in the infantry, in special forces, special operations. I've had special assignments. When my president was lying to the American people and saying that we were not in Laos and Cambodia, we were in Laos and Cambodia. And as I say, I look back on those years with a sense of pride. And I've done some things I should not have done, but I did them with the best of intentions, and I served my country as loyally as I knew how. But I'm standing here now, I'm taking a stand against my government, and I'm taking a stand against your government, and I'm saying that the time has come for the lying to stop. Your government and mine and all the other major governments on this planet have got to come forward and tell their people the truth. This issue, where are they from? Who are they? What are they here for? What's really going on? We had almost begun shooting at each other, the Soviets and us, the Allies, several times for the wrong reasons. On the morning of February the 2nd, 1961, an event occurred about 2 in the morning that almost began World War III. When it was over, and it only took about 18 minutes, this massive flyover of these large metallic circular objects flying over Europe, the Soviets went on red alert, the NATO allies went on red alert, the Soviets closed the wall in Berlin, everybody was gearing up, and in those days we were looking at each other across the divided Europe with our fingers on the triggers and our thumbs poised above the red buttons. And thermonuclear war was moments away. A British Air Marshal by the name of Sir Thomas Pike in 1961, who was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe at that time in Paris, said, "We've had enough of this. We're going to initiate an in-house study and find out what the hell is going on. Who are they? Where are they from? Why are they here? And what's it all about?" It took 3 years. From 61 to 1964, they published this in 1964, in the late summer of 64. They called it an assessment. It was a document that was roughly 1.5 inches thick, and it was supported by basically 8 inches of annexes and appendices. Copy number 1, when it was published, went to the Secretary General of NATO, who funded the whole study. Copy number 2 went to my boss, General Lyman Lemnitzer, an American Army 4-star general, who at that time was the Supreme Allied Commander. Copy number 3 was placed in the Shape War Room, a place we called Shock, a place that I worked on 12-hour shifts from time to time. Copy 3 was placed in the vault inside of Shock. And after it was published, and after I had a chance to see it, the opportunity to read it, I reread it, I studied it, I analyzed it, I damn near memorized it, and I went into a state of shock, literally. Because when this document, with all of its implications and all of its ramifications, was finally published, it had an impact upon me where I have never ever quite been the same. And I have to tell you, it had an impact on a lot of the top generals and admirals in NATO at that time, very much like it had upon me. An American 4-star general by the name of Robert Lee, who was the air deputy at that time. His aide told me that the old man sat down after having gone through this, introduced himself before I went on. And he says, delighted to see you. I had to come down and hear what you had to say. He says, I'm assigned at a U.S. facility here just up the road a bit. And I says, you wouldn't by any chance be working at Menwith Hill, would you? He said, well, yes. And most of you, I assume, know that Menwith Hill is one of the most classified super secret facilities in the United Kingdom. It is a U.S., UK, National Security Agency facility. And every phone call from Europe to the United States, every one, goes through the computers at Menwith Hill. But the young man was very candid, came forward and very pleasant, and said, hey, I just thought I'd say hello. So he was outspoken about it, but some of them will sit out there and not identify themselves. But if there is someone here from MOD, I want you to know you're welcome. I know that you're simply doing a job, and I commend you for it. But what was there about this shape study in 1967 that turned my life around and turned the life of everyone who was involved with it? As I said, it was an inch and a half thick, and it was supported by roughly 8 inches of annexes and appendices. They titled it an assessment. It had a subtitle of an evaluation of a possible military threat to Allied forces in Europe. It was a military study. It had a direct military focus. It was not a broad, wide-ranging kind of study. It only took 36 months. But it was determined, is there a military threat? And when they concluded it in '64, they determined that apparently there was not a military threat. But let me read to you some of the annexes and appendices that supported this document. There was one on radar and electromagnetic effects. There was one on optical and light analysis. An annex on photographic and holographic analysis. There was one on historical research and evidence. There was one on metallurgical and technical analysis, one on atmospheric physics and meteorological studies, one on biological analysis and autopsies, and I will touch upon that briefly before the evening's over, an annex on sociological studies and implications. There was one on psychological studies and the mass effect and impact upon people. And the last one, and in my view, over years and years of research and study, probably one of the most important of all, there was an annex on the theological implications and the worldwide effect upon organized religions. We have reached a point, however, where we're not going to be able to go unless we decide to walk away from our old bigotries and animosities and bloodletting savagery. And you all know what I'm talking about. My God, look what's been going on in Bosnia. What happened a year or so ago in Rwanda. Look at the savagery and bloodletting in Northern Ireland. The hatreds, the animosities, and the bigotries. If I leave anything behind tonight from my being here, and I leave anything with you at all, I want to leave you with the concept that we are all the same. We are all immortal spirits. We are all part of the divinity. We are all part of the everlasting God. We live forever, and we've got to come to terms with that. The humanity and the brotherhood of the human race. Now, I said we're running out of time. A special moment has arrived, a crucial moment in our history. I call it one of these crucial moments. I call it, what is it then in nuclear physics? Critical mass. I believe that the human species has reached literally a critical mass. It can either survive and go out and take its place in the universe with all of the other intelligences. We can go out there and claim our destiny, which I believe that that's what it is. We have a place out there that we need to be a part of. Or we can self-destruct. And I think that we are at that brief, crucial moment, that critical mass, where we've got to decide among ourselves not to self-destruct, but to take this invitation and to step out there and go through that door and reach our infinite destiny in the universe and take our place with that family of intelligence that literally the universe seems to be teeming with. Now, in closing this first portion, I have to tell you, a lot of people have been fascinated for many years, particularly Christians who've read the Bible and are familiar with the book of Revelation. There's a word known as the apocalypse that many people have been talking about for a long, long time. I say this, concluding this first portion of my presentation, by telling you that I went to an old dictionary and I dug into this dictionary, which is about that thick. I think it's the Oxford Dictionary. I really wanted to know what the meaning of the word apocalypse was, because I've heard all of these threats and all these stories in the book of Revelation. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, famine, whatever, plague, war, so on, place in the universe. To step through that door, we're being invited to come out. We have reached a point, however, where we're not going to be able to go unless we decide to walk away from our old bigotries and animosities and bloodletting, savagery. And you all know what I'm talking about. My God, look what's been going on in Bosnia. What happened a year or so ago in Rwanda. Look at the savagery and bloodletting in Northern Ireland. The hatreds, the animosities, and the bigotries. If I leave anything behind tonight from my being here, and I leave anything with you at all, I want to leave you with the concept that we are all the same. We are all immortal spirits. We are all part of the divinity. We are all part of the everlasting God. We live forever, and we've got to come to terms with that. The humanity and the brotherhood of the human race. Now, I said we're running out of time. A special moment has arrived, a crucial moment in our history. I call it one of these crucial moments. I call it, what is it then in nuclear physics? Critical mass. I believe that the human species has reached literally a critical mass. It can either survive and go out and take its place in the universe with all of the other intelligences. We can go out there and claim our destiny, which I believe that that's what it is. We have a place out there that we need to be a part of. Or we can self-destruct. And I think that we are at that brief, crucial moment, that critical mass, where we've got to decide among ourselves not to self-destruct, but to take this invitation and to step out there and go through that door and reach our infinite destiny in the universe and take our place with that family of intelligence that literally the universe seems to be teeming with. Now, in closing this first portion, I have to tell you, a lot of people have been fascinated for many years, particularly Christians who've read the Bible and are familiar with the book of Revelation. There's a word known as the apocalypse that many people have been talking about for a long, long time. I say this, concluding this first portion of my presentation, by telling you that I went to an old dictionary and I dug into this dictionary, which is about that thick. I think it's the Oxford Dictionary. I really wanted to know what the meaning of the word apocalypse was, because I've heard all of these threats and all these stories in the book of Revelation, but an extremely advanced technology that may possibly be hundreds, if not thousands of years beyond our own. Evidence collected and studied by this report indicates that apparently there is some kind of a process or a plan unfolding. They, whoever they are, continually demonstrate that the development of some kind of program is underway. Now, they knew that in 1964, and we know it in 1996. I'm not sure how many of our government authorities and military people know what that plan is all about. That something is unfolding, something is happening, something is developing, and we knew it as early as '64. Evidence in this report leads to the conclusion that this survey or program has been going on for a very long time, possibly several thousands of years. The military intelligence analysis have concluded that there did not, repeat, did not appear to be a major military threat involved. The conclusions seem to indicate that if they were either malevolent or hostile, that there was absolutely nothing that we could do at that time. And I have to tell you, there's nothing we could do at this time. NATO and SHAPE policy dictates that an ongoing study continue by the various military committees and that as many resources as possible by the major powers be committed to this matter. The entire subject is considered to be of the highest importance and extremely sensitive. This committee recommends that the highest level of classification be placed upon this matter, and if approved by SACURE, to be cosmic top secret or above. When they published it in '64, they gave it a cosmic top secret clearance. 2 years ago, Cecilia and I were visiting. We were in Dusseldorf. We took a weekend in between and we traveled over to Brussels. And I was able to visit the old SHAPE headquarters that I helped set up in 1967. While I was in there, I found out that the study is still in the files. It is still classified cosmic top secret. And it is still considered to be the most sensitive document NATO has. I hope that the time will come when NATO, SHAPE, your country, my country, all of them decide the time has come to tell the people the truth. Because I have said repeatedly to American taxpayers, it's not just a matter of you deserve the truth. You have a right to the truth. You have a need to know the truth, and for God's sake, you're paying all the bills. Who is this bunch of arrogant bureaucrats that have decided to keep something so intriguing? When it was over, and it only took about 18 minutes, this massive flyover of these large metallic circular objects flying over Europe, the Soviets went on red alert, the NATO allies went on red alert, the Soviets closed the wall in Berlin, everybody was gearing up, and in those days we were looking at each other across the divided Europe with our fingers on the triggers and our thumbs poised above the red buttons. And thermonuclear war was moments away. A British Air Marshal by the name of Sir Thomas Pike in 1961, who was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe at that time in Paris, said, we've had enough of this. We're going to initiate an in-house study and find out what the hell is going on. Who are they? Where are they from? Why are they here? And what's it all about? It took 3 years. From '61 to 1964, they published this in 1964, in the late summer of '64. They called it an assessment. It was a document that was roughly 1.5 inches thick, and it was supported by basically 8 inches of annexes and appendices. Copy number 1, when it was published, went to the Secretary General of NATO, who funded the whole study. Copy number 2 went to my boss, General Lyman Lemnitzer, an American Army 4-star general, who at that time was the Supreme Allied Commander. Copy number 3 was placed in the SHAPE War Room, a place we called Shock, a place that I worked on 12-hour shifts from time to time. Copy 3 was placed in the vault inside of Shock. And after it was published, and after I had a chance to see it, the opportunity to read it, I reread it, I studied it, I analyzed it, I damn near memorized it, and I went into a state of shock, literally. Because when this document, with all of its implications and all of its ramifications, was finally published, it had an impact upon me where I have never ever quite been the same. And I have to tell you, it had an impact on a lot of the top generals and admirals in NATO at that time, very much like it had upon me. An American 4-star general by the name of Robert Lee, who was the air deputy at that time. His aide told me that the old man sat down after having gone through this, and he threw his hat across the ring, and he said, my God, do you realize what this means? Nothing will ever be the same. All of what we have, our missiles, our satellites, our bombers, our fighters, our rockets, thermonuclear weapons, none of it. It meant nothing. the implications of this just interplanetary visitation. We know that. That's been going on for thousands of years. It isn't just interstellar, intergalactic, multidimensional. We've even learned that. But what the hell is really going on here? About 10 years ago, it became very clear to me that I'm no longer interested in who are they, and why are they here, and where are they from. I found that my focus and my primary interest and my curiosity was directed to who are we, and why are we here, where did we come from, and where are we going? And I've come up with what I believe to be some answers. They're my opinions. They're based on my 30 years of research. But I throw them out among you just to tease you a bit and say, do your own homework and do your own research. What have I concluded? Well, I think I can say it rather quickly. The human race is a hybrid race. We have literally been seeded on this planet. There is no such thing as a missing link. There is no missing link. The human race is a hybrid that has been seeded, and we have been genetically manipulated continually from the beginning of our history to what we are today. And that manipulation, that genetic manipulation, is still going on. Still going on today. I've concluded that we have had and continue to have an intimate interrelationship with several advanced extraterrestrial, highly evolved, incredibly involved intelligences out there. Some of them could be as much as 1 million to 1 billion years ahead of us. And stop for just a moment and imagine what that might be like. Just 1,000 years in technology. Imagine what the Earth will be like. Look what we've done in 150. My God, from the Wright brothers in 1903. And now you sit in a Boeing 747 and you're cruising at 40,000 feet, sipping a bourbon and eating a steak and watching the telly. And that's only in a few short years. Old Wilbur and Orville would have had a fit if they'd ever seen this. I'm always reminded of the joke, and it's real. It really happened. The good Bishop of Baltimore in Maryland in 1902 had said something to the effect that man will never fly. He wasn't meant to. That if had he been meant to fly, the good Lord would have given him the wings to do so. This is the good Bishop of Baltimore in Maryland. That bishop's name was Wright, and he had 2 nephews named Wilbur and Orville. The military and many of the leading politicians knew that we were dealing with roughly 4 separate civilizations. And we knew that as early as 1967. When I retired in 1976, I was told by friends in some rather high places that they knew at least of 12 different groups that were coming and going, that interrelating with us at some level. I imagine, and I've heard rumors, that, my God, it could be well over 100 at this point. Apparently, the evidence that we've collected indicates that space is literally teeming with intelligent life. It is not an exception. It basically appears to be the rule. The universe is teeming with life, and most of it is intelligent. Now, there are an extreme variety of shapes and sizes and forms and such, and we'll get into a little of that later. But in '64, we knew of 4. Now, the thing that troubled the generals and the admirals the most in 1964 was that one of those groups, and we had overwhelming evidence to support this, one of those groups looked exactly like we do. I mean exactly. They could sit next to you in a tram, restaurant, an airplane, a theater, right beside you, and you would never know. And it's usually at this point that I've noticed that some of the wives look at their husbands and sort of quizzically, and then, well, let me go on. They discussed it in '64. The conversations in the NAFI cafeteria. We used to discuss classified material all the time because all of us there had a cosmic level clearance. You couldn't work in shock unless you had a cosmic level. One day at lunch, we were sipping a little wine, and I have to tell you that in France, the French force you to drink wine. It's not an option, it's not a choice. You have to drink it. And so we're all sitting having lunch in the Nafi cafeteria, sipping a little wine, and the conversation got a little heated. And one of the generals said, "Do you realize that they get to be walking up and down the corridors here of shape?" And a colonel said, "My God, do you realize they could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon?" And an American lieutenant colonel, who had had a bit too much wine for lunch, I think, said, "Do you realize they could even be in the White House?" Now, there was a little forced laughter at that point, particularly among the Americans around the table, because many of us had had some strong misgivings about the occupants of the White House over the last few years. And I'll be frank with you, I have some strong misgivings about the present occupant, but I won't go any further with that. This is an election year. What I have seen and learned and concluded. And why is it that I stand in front of you and tell you that I'm talking to you about the most important issue of our time, and very possibly the most important issue in the history of the human race? Well, here is what I have concluded, and I found that many, many researchers have reached exactly the same conclusions that I have. I brought with me a copy of an article written by the famous French astrophysicist Jacques Vallée. We reproduced a few copies, and Cecilia has them out there on the table, and you can pick them up simply for the cost of reproduction. But Jacques is a brilliant man. He's an astrophysicist, and he's also a computer genius. He's been studying the UFO phenomenon for over 30 years. He was a fellow friend of Allen Hynek, the American astronomer who was the advisor to Project Blue Book many, many years ago. So I encourage you to pay attention to what Jacques has to say, and I'm pleased and proud to tell you that my conclusions and Jacques are almost basically the same. When I began my research, I was very curious and very interested in who they were, just as the military study itself was all about. Who are they? Where are they from? Why are they here? And what's it all about? I'm still interested in that, but I have long since stopped doing individual bits and pieces of research. I no longer interview contactees or abductees. I no longer go out into the fields and pour plaster of Paris into landing gear imprints around in some farmer's pasture. I don't go out with my Geiger counter anymore and take radiation measurements. I used to do that all the time. I finally decided that this is a waste of my time. We're not trying to find out if there's such a thing as UFOs any longer. Your government and mine knew that 30 years ago. When the SHAPE study was published in 1967, I was to learn later that the United States Air Force and the Royal Air Force, I'm convinced, knew as much in 1949 as we learned from the SHAPE study in 1967. From 1947 to 49, UFOs were crashing all over the United Kingdom and all over the United States. Your forces were retrieving them, covering them up, shipping them out. The Army was doing the same thing. The Air Force in my country did the same thing. You all heard of Roswell, I'm sure. We had 12 crashes in 25 months, and Roswell was simply one. And in every one of those 12 crashes, we retrieved alien hardware, and we retrieved little bodies. And some of the little dudes were still alive when we retrieved them. Several we kept alive for quite a while. Our pilots are basically humanoid. Anyhow, when the military reached these conclusions in 1964, as I said, they have continued to study it in desperation. Now, your military and mine, and one of the reasons that they're trying so hard to still sit on top of this cover-up, it isn't so much that they don't know how to tell you what they know. They honestly don't know how to tell you what they don't know. And you're not going to have military leadership, and you're not going to have political leadership in government admitting to you that there are things they don't know. If it had simply been a matter of coming forward 15, 20, 30 years ago and saying, hey, we think you have a need to know this. We've learned that there are some extraterrestrial intelligences out there, and they've been coming here and dropping in from time to time. If it were simply that, you would have probably been told a long time ago. When I retired in 1976, we knew that we were not merely dealing with interplanetary visitation. We had known at that time that we were dealing with intelligences that were apparently coming and going from other planets, even a couple in our own solar system. We learned at that early age, or at that early date, that we were dealing with intelligences that were apparently interstellar in their origin, coming here from other star systems. Now, don't ever believe the physicist or astronomer who tells you they can't get here from there, or we can't get there from here. That's a lot of nonsense. Yes, Cecilia, I avoided the BS word. We knew in '76, interplanetary, interstellar. We even had some evidence that some of the visiting intelligences were intergalactic. And for those of you who've studied astronomy and have some concept of what's out there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, the thing that troubled the scientists, the military, the politicians, and the physicists the most is we learned that we were apparently dealing with some advanced intelligences that apparently were multidimensional in their origin. Now, I'm not enough of a physicist to even begin to tell you what a dimension is. I know from what I've been told that we live in three. According to Einstein, the fourth is time and space. Quantum physicists, young theoretical physicists that are teaching in universities today, tell us that there are at least 10, maybe more, different dimensions. Well, I have a few personal views on that. But if there's time, I'll share them with you. But that manipulation, that genetic manipulation is still going on. Still going on today. I've concluded that we have had and continue to have an intimate interrelationship with several advanced extraterrestrial, highly evolved, incredibly involved intelligences out there. Some of them could be as much as 1 million to 1 billion years ahead of us. And stop for just a moment and imagine what that might be like. Just 1,000 years in technology. Imagine what the Earth will be like. Look what we've done in 150. My God, from the Wright brothers in 1903. And now you sit in a Boeing 747 and you're cruising at 40,000 feet, sipping a bourbon and eating a steak and watching the telly. And that's only in a few short years. Old Wilbur and Orville would have had a fit if they'd ever seen this. I'm always reminded of the joke, and it's real. It really happened. The good Bishop of Baltimore in Maryland in 1902 had said something to the effect that man will never fly. He wasn't meant to. That if had he been meant to fly, the good Lord would have given him the wings to do so. This is the good Bishop of Baltimore in Maryland. That bishop's name was Wright, and he had 2 nephews named Wilbur and Orville. And that's only just a few years ago. Imagine what the next few years will bring. Try, if you can, to imagine an intelligence, a society, a civilization that is 1 million years ahead of us. Our ancestors thought of them as gods, and we deified them, because they've been coming and going with us from the beginning of our history. When I say intimate interrelationship, I mean intimate. Ladies and gentlemen, you have starseed in your veins. Many of you may have suspected it, but every one of you in the audience tonight is starseed. And that's one hell of a story. And that's one of the stories that your government doesn't want you to know. It's one of the stories that your church does not want you to know. It's one of the things that the beautiful young man in Galilee 2,000 years ago tried to say, and nobody grasped for a moment what he was talking about. He said, you are as gods. What I do, you can do, and even more. And he tried to tell them about his Father's house having so many mansions. and he had other flocks, and he had other sheep. And that's only a Christian tradition. The same basic story is told in the Bhagavad Gita, the holy book of the Hindus.